the largest organ of the human body is the skin. So the biggest action of the skin is that it prevents the microorganism from entering into the body. So for organisms to enter into the body, the breakage of this barrier or the integrity of the skin is one of the very essential part of acquiring an infection. Next comes is in the respiratory tract we have what is called as the mucociliary clearance. The mucociliary clearance means there are specialized cells in the respiratory epithelium which have cilia and they secrete mucus, and this mucus is cleared from the lower respiratory tract through the larynx and is again swallowed or thrown out of the body. This gets rid of most of the microorganisms or even the various pollutants that enter into the respiratory tract. Next we have, I think you already know, that reduced pH in our stomach by the gastric acid. Most of the pathogens which enter into the body through the oral route are inactivated by the gastric acids. And again we have various kinds of enzymes. It may be a lysozyme that is present in the tears which helps inactivating most of the microorganisms that come in contact with the eyes or the cornea. Similarly, we have various enzymes in our mouth and other parts of the GI tract and even including the genital organs where the mucosal membrane come in contact with various organisms. Now, when you look at the innate immune system, we have various cells in the human body, most of the WBCs, as you already know, most of them. Along with that, we have the various peptides and proteins which are present in the blood on the cardiovascular system also. Now, this is a overall list of the various types of physical barriers and the various functions of this, like the acidic pH in stomach or the fatty acids that are present in the sweat, various enzymes in various secretions. And when we look at the various organs of the immune system, the most important organ is the lymphatic system, and the lymphatic system comprises of the lymph nodes and the lymphatic ducts. The predominant lymph nodes, I think you have already read in your anatomical classes, are the lymph nodes present near the orifices, like the submandibular, the jugular group of lymph nodes that are present near the mouth and the nose. Again, we have the axillary and the inguinal lymph node, again mediastinal lymph node, and even popliteal lymph node. The basic function of this lymph node is that is the place where if any microorganism does enters into the body through skin or mucous membrane, that is the first place in which those microorganisms are arrested before it enters into the bloodstream. Furthermore, these are the lymph nodes in which these microorganisms are broken down and the antigens of these microorganisms are processed. Thereby, it may lead to either a humoral immune response or a cell-mediated immune response. Now, let us look at the various cells of the immune system. Now, please try to recall the hematopoietic stem cells, and from the hematopoietic stem cells, we get these various kinds of cells. What are these cells? At the end, we can find the most numerous cells are the erythrocytes, and along with them, we have the white blood cells comprising of eosinophils, basophils, and neutrophils. Along with that, we also have something called as macrophages. In the blood, they are called as a monocyte, and when they move out into the tissue, they are called as the tissue macrophages. Again, in the lymphoid cells, if we see, we have two types of cells. The one is the large cells, it is called as the natural killer cells, and another is called as the small lymphocytes, which again is differentiated into either T lymphocyte or B lymphocyte. Keep in mind, the B lymphocyte will, when exposed to a particular antigen, will change into a plasma cell, and the function of this plasma cell is production of antibodies, that is the immunoglobulins. Whereas the T lymphocytes, the main function of the T lymphocyte is regulation and mediation of the cell-mediated immunity. The natural killer cells is part of the innate immune system and not a part of the adaptive immune system. That means, irrespective of whether any kind of antigen is processed or not, these natural killer cells will go and find any kind of defective cells of the human body and will kill them. So, these are the cells of the immune system. What we must understand is the two important functions. One is the white blood cells, that is the eosinophils, neutrophils, and basophils, and along with the lymphocytes. And in case of lymphocytes, again we have the B cells, T cell, and the natural killer cells. So most of the adaptive immune response that we see in the human body is mediated by the lymphocytes. And the predominant innate response or the immediate response on exposure to any kind of pathogen that we see is by the white blood cells. Moving on, now let us look at the immune response. What happens after a body gets exposed to any kind of pathogen? Whatever that outcome is, we call it as an immune response. So, suppose there is a pathogen which is able to break through the natural barriers of the human body, then it comes in contact with the immune system. That is predominantly through the lymph and the blood. Thereafter, first thing that can happen is, it is called as no immune response or tolerance. Suppose this organism is not an pathogen, the body will not react to it. Or if the pathogen has already been exposed to the body and the body has already learned to produce antibody against that pathogen, only antibody secretion will occur. That means full-fledged immune response will not be seen. This can be called as immune tolerance. That means your body has learned to react to certain pathogens and not react to certain pathogens. Now, when I say this, that means some organisms, against some organism the body reacts and against some the body doesn't. So, these are the type of the organisms, we call them as pathogens. Now, suppose if the microorganism is able to trigger the immune system, we will see the immune response. What kind of immune response? There will be two types. One is called as the non-specific, another will be the specific. What will be the non-specific reaction? The innate cells, that is predominantly the white blood cells, the neutrophils, the eosinophils and the basophils will be triggered, and the main mediation will be seen is called as phagocytosis. Even macrophages will be involved in them. They will liberate various kinds of cytokines from interleukins to cell factors. These cytokines will further accentuate this immune response, triggering more and more phagocytosis, and by phagocytosis the body is able to eliminate the pathogen. Simultaneously, if the body is not able to get rid of the pathogen, or during phagocytosis the antigens of the pathogen is exposed, those antigens will trigger what is we call it as adaptive immune response. In the adaptive immune response, if the B cells are triggered, that is the humoral part of the immune system, the B cells will process the antigen of the pathogen and expand some of the B cells clonally to form plasma cells. These plasma cells will now produce antibodies which will directly react to the same antigen and thereby getting rid of the antigens. Now keep in mind, this is the main modality of elimination of certain pathogens like viruses, where viruses are not killed by phagocytosis but rather neutralized by immunoglobulins. Furthermore, if the cell mediated part of the immune system is triggered, the T cells will get rid of the cells which are infected. Suppose some of the pathogens get inside the human cells, that is the intracellular pathogens. The T cells will then get rid of the human cells which are infected with various microorganisms. Furthermore, this cell mediated immunity can also be triggered by the innate response. Keep in mind, the natural killer cells is part of the innate immune system. Okay. I hope now you can understand this is the holistic approach of the immune response. Now, question is, which part of the immune system will be triggered? That will depend on the type of the pathogen that is exposed to the body and also the status of the immune system of the body. Okay. Now, this is the picture which shows now the B cells. The name of the B cells come from, any idea? The cells are classified into B cells and T cells. The T cells are named because they develop in the thymus of the human beings. Hence, they are called as the T cells. The B cells were originally found to be developing in the bursa fabricus of uh, avian species, and human beings it is found in the bone marrow. Now, so inside the bone marrow, the progenitor cells will develop from pro B cell to pre B cell, and then it will form the immature B cells. Over here, the B cells are tagged by various CD factors or cluster differentiating factors which modulate and get, there is something called as central tolerance. That means all the cells which are able to react to the own cells of the human body, that is cells of the human body, those cells are negatively selected. That means those cells die by apoptosis. So all the cells which do not act against the own human body are selected. Thereafter, these cells will mature to form the mature B cells. These B cells, when if properly stimulated, will modify to become the plasma cells, and each and every plasma cell will then produce immunoglobulins in either classes of either IgG, IgM, IgA, D or E. So this is what it is. You can see in the bone marrow all the progenitor cells are there, and even in case of B cells it comes from the bone marrow. Just keep in mind it was named after the bursa of fabricus that is found in chicken. T cells will develop in the thymus, and like the B cells, there is again the positive selections and the negative selection based on the cluster differentiating factors, thereby maturation of the T cells. Now keep in mind this selection of B and T cells actually prevent the immune system to react against the own body. If there is any error in this selection, these cells will start reacting to the own human body. If the T cells start reacting, particular organ damage is seen when these T cells attack any kind of organ. If the B cells are there, they will start producing antibodies against the own human cells. That is also called as autoimmunity. We'll come to it later. Okay. So, over here you can see the brief description of the innate immune response. When the pathogen enters into the body, the macrophages, they will encounter the pathogen and try to, the process that develops is called as phagocytosis, try to get rid of the organism itself. Sometimes it may fail to get rid of the organism. In that case, many macrophages are recruited with the help of the cytokines to form granuloma cells, as seen especially in case of tuberculosis. Now these cells will further trigger other kinds of inflammation, like it can trigger the basophils or the eosinophils. Eosinophils again seen very commonly especially in fungal infections or parasitic infections, and monocytes and natural killer cells. Okay, now look at this picture. Till now we had discussed about the various types of immune response. That is, either it will be a adaptive or a cell mediated. Again, this immune response, we can classify them into two types. One is called as the local immune response, and one is the systemic immune response. Basically, it's the same thing. Whenever you have an injury, suppose you have an injury in the hand and that wound gets infected, what will happen to that part of the body? There will be signs of inflammation. Try to recall in pathology, there is a rumor, color, tumor. So why this inflammation occurs? Because whenever there is tissue damage, cytokines are released from the damaged tissue cells, and these cytokines will trigger and recruit macrophages and other cells of inflammation. These cells will try to get rid of the pathogen and get rid of the necrosed and dead human cells also. This is called as the local tissue response or local immune response. Now suppose the organism from the local wound enters into the systemic circulation. Then we can have a systemic response where the patient may end up having fever because of the liberation of the various cytokines in the blood and circulatory system, and triggering of both cell mediated and adaptive immune system. That is one part of the immune system which is also called as the complement system. Now as the name suggests, complement means it helps in the action of the other parts of the immune system, that is, it complements. Now what does this system comprised of? It basically comprised of various proteins that are produced predominantly by the liver. There are many pathways commonly called as the classical pathway or the lectin pathway or the alternative pathway. What are these pathways? These are the various ways this complement system could be triggered. The triggering factor could be a pathogen itself or an antibody or some parts of the pathogen which are detected by the pathogen identification factors. Whatever may be the pathway by which the complement may be activated, the end result is something called as the membrane attack complex. Now, what is this membrane attack complex? It is basically a pore forming enzyme and is able to form a pore on the surface of the pathogen. If the pathogen has a pore on its surface, most of the cellular contents will come out and thereby the pathogen can be killed. Now, also keep in mind that in all these pathways can also be triggered by other factors of the pathogen parts also. It could be an immunoglobulin, it could be an antigen also. So, all in all, the complement system helps in the further functioning of the immune response, especially in the blood. So, till now, I think we have covered about what the immune system does, what are the cells of the immune system, and what are the immune response. And I have also told you there is something called as immune tolerance. That means sometimes the immune system, body does not let the immune system to act. That is called as immune tolerance. Now, if the immune system fails to act, that is also problematic. And if it acts overzealously, that is also problematic. For example, as you can see in this picture, suppose this is the normal immune response. The pathogens are exposed, antibodies form, the antibodies will get rid of the pathogen or the antigens and the body will go back to its homeostasis. But if the body starts producing the antibodies endlessly or even after the infection has subsided, then these antibodies may attack own cells. That is called as autoimmune response. To prevent it, we have what is called as immune tolerance. The immune tolerance happens both in humoral fraction and also in the cell mediated fraction. Humoral fraction means the production of antibodies, that means the B cells. I have already told you the B cells will have a central mechanism and a peripheral mechanism. Central mechanism means the B cells originate from the bone marrow. So during the maturation in the bone marrow, there is selection of the B cells which does not have affinity to self cells. That is called as the central tolerance. Again, there is another thing that is called as peripheral tolerance. Now, what is the main purpose of the peripheral tolerance? Suppose if a B cell, it may not recognize its own human cell, but when it comes into the periphery, it may get triggered by various other factors or pathogens and it may mimic human cells. So, there must be a mechanism to downregulate these B cells in the periphery, that means in the lymph node. That is called as the peripheral tolerance. Have you understood? There is a two type of tolerance, one is the central and is the peripheral. Similarly, the cell mediated fraction mediated by the T cells, it will also have two types of tolerance. Again, one is called as the central tolerance and the peripheral tolerance. Now, over here the central tolerance will occur in the thymus itself. That means during the growth of the child, inside the thymus, only those T cells will be recruited and these T cells will mature which have no affinity to human cells itself. And similarly, when these T cells come out in the circulation, there are many types of tolerance in the periphery, that is called as clonal deletion or ignorance or energy or immune regulation. So, these are the four main mechanisms by which the T cell response is down regulated in the periphery, that means especially in the lymph nodes and in the spleen, so that these T cells do not attack human cells. Okay, now we have understood the immune response and how the body normally regulates the immune response. Now, whenever this immune response falters, we have diseases. That is the main concern. What kind of diseases we can have? The first thing is called as immune deficiency. Immune deficiency means the immune cells or the immune system is not able to mount a proper immune response. This may be because of a congenital factor, because of many genetical abnormalities in which one fraction of the cells or the organ system may be affected, thereby proper immune response may not be seen. Or it could be because of some acquired conditions. These acquired conditions very commonly like infections like HIV virus or medications with steroid or iatrogenic suppression of the immune response. This is what we call as immune deficiencies. So whatever may be the cause, the ultimate result is immune deficiency. That means even after on exposed to certain pathogens, the human body is not able to mount sufficient immune response. Alternatively, we can have something called as hyper response. That means unwanted exaggerated response of the immune system. This unwanted exaggerated response may be a localized in the form of an allergy like urticaria, or this may be a generalized allergy, for example anaphylaxis. So that is an hyperactive response either locally or generalized, or the immune response may be either in humoral fraction, that is production of autoantibodies, or auto-reactive T cells, in which there is direct destruction of the human cells and organs. That is called as autoimmune diseases. It could be mediated either by autoimmune immunoglobulins, that is immunoglobulins targeting the same or own cells, or activated T cells which attack own cells. The next what is come is called as very commonly seen in case of sepsis. That is, in sepsis there is an ongoing inflammatory chain. The pathogen enters into the body, it triggers an immune response with liberation of the cytokines. Obviously, there are some cytokines which will accelerate the immune response and some cytokines which will down-regulate the immune response. Many a times, the down-regulating cytokines may not be sufficient and it leads to a vicious cycle of hyperactivation of the immune response. This and liberation of huge amount of cytokines. This is called as cytokine storm. Many times, this cytokine storm may end up in what is called as macrophage activation syndrome. That means in almost all tissues, the tissue macrophages are activated significantly high, resulting in local tissue destruction. This is called as macrophage activation syndrome. Another disastrous consequence is in response to this cytokine production in the bone marrow itself. Something happens which is called as hemophagocytosis. That means the macrophages in the bone marrow start eating up other cells, including the hematopoietic cells. That is called as HLH syndrome or hemophagocytosis, lymphohistocytosis. So this is a dreaded consequence of this phenomenon of sepsis. And the last but not the least, we have malignancies. Now I have already told you the natural killer cells, they are the part of the innate immune system, and a very important function of the natural killer cell is to get rid of aberrant human cells. That means during the propagation and regeneration of the human cells, if any human cell comes out to be defective, these cells are normally get rid of by the natural killer cells. Now, if the natural killer cells fail to perform its own function, what will happen? The dysplastic and metaplastic cells will not be killed and they will go on propagating. That is what is called as malignancies. So, even in malignancies, we can see a defective immune response. So, all the immune disorders can be briefly categorized into these things, that is immune deficiencies which could be congenital or acquired, it could be allergies which may be a localized or generalized, it could be autoimmune disease, regional or systemic, or it could be sepsis, cytokine storm or macrophage activation syndrome, and finally even in malignancies the immune response is subdued. Coming to the last part of the discussion is immune prophylaxis. Now, what can we do after studying all this? That is called as immune prophylaxis. Prophylaxis means to prevent the disease. So, with the help of triggering the immune system, we can prevent many diseases. If we prevent the disease from occurring in the first place, we call it as active immunization. Most common type of active immunization is vaccines that are given for various diseases prior to exposure of the pathogen itself. I think you must be acquainted with the National Immunization Schedule, where children are vaccinated against various diseases right in the childhood. That is, before the child comes in exposure to all these pathogens. Now, something is called as passive immune prophylaxis. What is passive immune prophylaxis? Now, suppose a person is not able to mount sufficient immune response. Will the vaccines work? The answer is no, because the vaccines actually trigger the immune response. Now, suppose if a person fails to mount an immune response, so what we need to do? We need to provide the same factors from the outside. Most commonly are the immunoglobulins. So, if we inject the immunoglobulins into the patient, after the patient gets exposure to the disease, we call it as passive immunoglobulins or passive immunization. So, both active and passive immunization helps us in preventing the disease to occur. Okay. So, in case of vaccines, it is given prior to the exposure, and in case of passive immune prophylaxis, it is given after the exposure, especially in people who may not be able to mount an immune response. A faulty immune system, or also because of the nature of the disease, suppose the disease is very rapidly progressing, even in that case scenario, we may have to give immunoglobulins for passive prophylaxis. Finally, something called as combined immune prophylaxis. Now, what is combined immune prophylaxis? Suppose a person is exposed and the nature of the disease is such that even if the person mounts an immune response, the time it takes to mount an immune response will not be sufficient to prevent the infection. In that case scenario, both the vaccines and immunoglobulins both are given simultaneously. That is called as combined immune response. A very good example would be that is of rabies vaccination that is given after exposure to a dog bite. Because in certain places, for example, in the upper limb, on the face or the head and the neck, if the bite is in these regions, the chances are, even with the vaccination, the immunoglobulin has to be given in this case scenario. That is called as combined immune prophylaxis. Furthermore, I have already told you, defective immune response may lead to propagation of malignancies. There are many malignancies which are now being tested, and it is hypothesized that these malignancies could be prevented with vaccination. An example would be the use of the BCG to prevent urinary bladder cancer. So, there are many researches going on. Coming to the last part, this is the comprehensive slide which shows the immune response in a very comprehensive manner. That is, after the human body gets exposed to a pathogen, it will trigger the innate immune response, and we can see local immune response which is manifested with signs of inflammation. This will trigger the macrophages. It could be the blood monocytes in the blood or tissue macrophages, which will try to get rid of the pathogen by phagocytosis. Again, these macrophages will present the various antigens after the pathogen is destroyed to particular type of cells called as the dendritic cells. These dendritic cells are also called as antigen presenting cells. So, these cells will take up the antigen, that is the proteins on the pathogens, and will trigger both the T cells and the B cells. Based on the antigen triggering, both T cell and B cell activation will occur. The B cell activation will result in production of immunoglobulins, and T cell activation will production of activated T cells, which will get rid of the human tissues, which are cells which are infected by the pathogen. Simultaneously, because of the phagocytosis, there will be liberation of various kinds of cytokines. These cytokines will further trigger recruitment of other inflammatory cells, including phagocyte neutrophils, macrophages, etc., even eosinophils and basophils, further triggering the local inflammation. Okay. So this is the comprehensive diagram of the immune response.